Thank you all for joining us today. It is really exciting to see such a crowd here. And my name is Chung-Yi, a co-chair of Professional Development Group in the American Geophysical Union Hydrology Section Student Subcommittee, or H3S. So I will be monitoring this panel discussion on succeeding as a postdoc. And this will be our first event in this summer series, in collaboration with CUAHSI on navigating academic water career development panels. And in the past, we had hosted similar events, but this year, we will focus on the transition process from the student to the future academic or non-academic careers. Also, we will organize several grant writing workshops later this year, so please follow H3S to keep up with the most updated information. So, today, we will focus on the topic of succeeding as a postdoc. To that, we have 4 fantastic panelists with us today. And I want them to introduce themselves, sharing their amazing experience, and then jump into the questions. But before that, let me give you a quick rundown on how today's panel discussion is going to work. Our panel discussion today will cover 3 parts: the pre-postdoc part, and as a postdoc part, and as well as the post-postdoc part. And I encourage you to submit the question using the Q&A feature that Julia just mentioned, and you should be able to find it at the bottom of this Zoom meeting room. And we will take as many questions as we can within the time limit. So now I would like to pass the mic to our wonderful panelists to introduce themselves and share their backgrounds and experience. And each of them will have around 4 minutes. And for each, we can go in order of the appearance on the screen, and then we can jump into the question afterwards.
Okay, so I think I'm first. My name is Aditi Bhaskar. I'm a faculty member at Colorado State University. I just want to give a plug for H3S, organizing this session and all the other, or this panel and all the other events H3S is doing. That was not a group when I was a graduate student. I wish it was a group when I was a graduate student. So I hope you'll get involved with H3S if you're listening in some way and already involved by coming to this panel, learning more about succeeding as a postdoc. So I think one of the reasons maybe I was asked to be a panelist is because I had an experience as an NSF Earth Sciences postdoctoral fellow. So when I was a grad, and just to explain a little bit about how that happened, when I was a graduate student, I didn't know about this fellowship at first. It was just a kind of chance conversation in the AGU poster hall, maybe a year before I was finishing my PhD. A colleague told me about this fellowship and how I might check it out. So I looked it up, and it still exists. It's soliciting applications every year for postdoc fellows, and other postdocs you may hear about. Opportunities are on a specific PI's grant, and they're advertising for that. There are also some opportunities that are through a funding agency. So this is one of them where you have to write a proposal. So I had never written a proposal before other than my PhD kind of dissertation proposal, but there was a visiting seminar speaker who I thought was doing really interesting work. And so I kind of approached the speaker afterwards, said, I'm interested in working on this. She said, that sounds great, but I don't have any funding. So maybe you can see what we can do, see what you can do to get funding. So that's when I decided to apply to this fellowship, which happened to work out. And I got some feedback from that postdoc advisor on what I was proposing, although the topic was a little bit different. So I just thought it was an exciting experimental setup in Clarksburg, Maryland, to be able to look at those watersheds and work on something different than what they'd already been looking at. So I think that's how it happened, and I will pass it on to the next person.
All right. Hi, my name is Landon Marston. I am an assistant professor at Virginia Tech in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. A little bit about me. Before I came to Virginia Tech, I spent 3 years at Kansas State University, where I was an assistant professor. And then before that, I did my PhD at the University of Illinois, graduated in 2017. And then we keep going back in time. Before that, I was working for the Army Corps of Engineers as a water resource engineer for about 4 years. And so I had a little bit of a stint outside of academia for a while, trying to kind of find my path, and decided I wanted to be a professor. And so that's what led me to get my PhD. And I also have degrees from University of Kentucky, where I'm from, and that's actually home right now visiting family, including a bachelor's in civil engineering and an MBA, then a master's in engineering at Texas A&M to follow that. So you'll notice in my background, I didn't say I did a PhD, I did a postdoc, which is maybe a little peculiar for a panelist who's talking about being a postdoc, not have done a postdoc before. And I think the reason I was perhaps asked to be on this panel is because, one, I'm just perhaps a few years removed from where you guys are sitting right now, and give a little bit of experience or insights on that transition from a PhD or perhaps a postdoc to being a PI, but also maybe to offer an alternative path, or give you a different perspective on doing a postdoc versus not doing a postdoc. And in addition to that, I also have hired 3 postdocs and potentially a 4th in the coming year or so. So I've got a little bit of maybe insights on what it looks like, or what PIs are looking for when they hire a postdoc.
Hi, so I'm Manabendra Saharia. So maybe among the 4 panelists, I may be the only one who is outside of the US right now. So I'm currently an assistant professor in Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, in the Department of Civil Engineering. But I was in the US for about 9 years. And during that time, I was a postdoc in 2 labs. One is the NASA Goddard Hydrology Lab. And then the other one is the Research and Applications Lab in National Center for Atmospheric Research. So when I was in my, I did my PhD from University of Oklahoma, where I worked in the National Weather Center. And that's some of you may be aware of it. If you're not aware, it's a great place for water research, not just weather. So, so when I was in my PhD, I actually did not know that there were hydrologists in NCAR. I always thought that it's mostly like atmospheric scientists doing weather forecasting. But I knew one person who had moved there a few years back, but I was not in touch with them. I knew him from my master's, Andy Wood, and then one thing led to another. I was, towards the end of my PhD, I was looking for a postdoc position, and it just happened. It was just a happenstance that he had a position open, and he had half a position open. So he offered me a position along with someone else, Andy Newman, and I joined that lab, and that was kind of the start of my postdoctoral journey. But I spent it in 2 labs, and hopefully the things I experienced, some of it may be useful to hopefully a few people. So in Goddard, I was primarily responsible for developing a seasonal flood forecasting system for West Africa. And in NCAR, I was working on uncertainty quantification of flood frequency estimates and ensemble stream flow forecasting. I don't know how diverse I'm guessing the CUAHSI audience is very diverse. So this, in the wide water domain, I'm primarily in the hydrology forecasting world. I was asked to put something in terms of like experience as a postdoc when I couldn't say my intro. And one thing I think that really helped me was cold emailing just out of the blue. I have experienced, over the years, I've found out that people are generally they're very helpful. And oftentimes when you're on the other side, because now I sit on the other side of the bench, when I was a student and a postdoc, oftentimes I wouldn't have it's in your back of a mind, like, should I email that person? Should I ask them if they have a position? Like, are they going to be open to this? Or, but I think that's something of a barrier that a lot of students experience. especially early PhD students. So I think that's something that if you want to approach someone, you should, because I think most people are generally quite helpful. And I found that especially when it comes of talking about postdoctoral opportunities, people will be very helpful, not only in terms of fellowship opportunities, but also positions, project positions that they have in terms of, talking about them and all. So thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me to the panel, and hopefully we'll have a good discussion. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I am the last panelist. I am actually a postdoc right now. And my name is Marta Zaniolo. I'm a postdoc in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at Stanford University. Bit about my background before this. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in environmental engineering. For my PhD, I kept working on environmental system, but I moved to a computer science department. So my work became more computational. My PhD is in systems and control, but I got all my degrees from Politecnico di Milano in Milan, Italy, which is where I'm from. And a little under 2 years ago now, I started as a postdoc here at Stanford. So I should really update that Dr. Zaniolo is a new postdoc. I'm not that new anymore. But here at Stanford, I'm co-advised by two professors in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department, Sarah Fletcher and Megan Motter. And for those of you who know them, and the way I got this job is really through the network that I was able to form during my PhD, kind of going to conferences and joining group meetings and getting to know folks in the area. Long story short, I met Sarah Fletcher at a conference. We liked each other's work. About a year later, I was looking for a postdoc position. She was looking for a postdoc, and so it worked out. And then she was initiating a collaboration with my other current advisor, Megan. So this is how we converged to the co-advising situation that I am now. And well, this co-advised positions might be of interest to some of you. If they are, I'm happy to respond to the questions of the pros and the cons. But I really enjoyed it right now, and that's enough for me, I think, to kind of get us going. And I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you so much for having me.
Looks like you're muted.
Okay, cool. So great, thank you. So I think at this point, we are ready to jump into the question. Let me enlarge these. So the first question is actually direct to all of you, but maybe we can start with Aditi first. So this is a common question from our audience. What is the right plan to prepare for a postdoc?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about a few things about this that are considerations. One is timing. You have to know your target date when you're finishing, and then I see maybe somebody's already asking a question in the Q&A about what topic you're interested in working on. If you're interested in continuing along the same path, similar to what you've been working on, if you're looking to develop some new skills, work in a different area, there's some pros and cons to all those things, but figuring out some degree of where your scope of interest is, and then that has to be matching in some way with what's available, either you being able to create that position through a fellowship opportunity or that position being available and advertised. So yeah, I'll let other people chime in with their thoughts on this.
Anyone would like to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, sure, I can go. I think there's no correct recipe for everyone, right? And maybe it's about sort of setting your priorities and asking the right questions before selecting one of these positions. Like in terms of my experience, I mentioned I'm co-advised, and what I like about it is that I can sort of keep a foot planted in my network with one of my advisor. but also look at other water problems with the other advisor. One of my advisors, Sarah, kind of started at Stanford as a professor at the same time that I did. And so it allowed me to sort of experience the genesis of a research group and pick the logo and kind of figure out what's the direction from there. And instead Megan is more established. And so I could see what a successful established group looks like in the long term. And so these are the reason I'm mentioning this is that these are all things that there's no right or wrong, but these are all things that might a PhD student might want to think about in terms of selecting one or another position. And yeah, this no position will tick all the boxes, but I think just sort of thinking about these questions is a good way of starting to prepare for a postdoc.
Great. And we have a question. Oh, before that, anyone want to put more details or more content? Okay, so we have a question come from our participants that they said they are wondering whether that they should look for the lab having more similar areas or have diverse more. So maybe Manap, you want to take this one?
Yes, so I think yeah, I had a very clear, like this question came to my mind, you know, when I was in a final year of my PhD, what I wanted to do for my postdoc. So, and this was a big factor of where I wanted to go, because in my PhD was primarily concentrating on like statistics and analysis and that kind of work. But during my master's, I had mostly done hydrologic modeling, and I wanted to experience some of that again during my postdoc work towards it. So it was clear in my mind that if I had an opportunity, I would rather go towards land surface modeling and hydrologic modeling and something that would allow me to work with models rather than working with statistics, because I thought I had gained some amount of experience. So here, I won't say, it's a question of how many options you have. If you, obviously you are going to go with the best available option, but my suggestion would always be to diversify a little bit during your postdoc and not continue, because our natural state is always inertia, right? We are experienced with something, and generally we know people in that hyper specific area, so we want to continue in that area. That thought comes to all of our minds. But given an option, I think being a little bit uncomfortable in your postdoc would pay dividends, especially if you're looking for a tenure track position and eventually you advise students, because it helps you to work in 2-3 concurrent areas. So yes, I would say look for a little bit of diversity in your postdoc away from your PhD topic.
Yeah, I think I would largely agree with that. I'll add to that a bit and actually circle back to the previous question, you know, how to prepare for a postdoc position. And I think this is more universal advice as opposed to just specific to being a postdoc. And this is something I share with my PhD students and my postdocs as well, is, you know, always start with the end goal in mind. So think about where you want to be, and then what skills or, you know, things you need to have on your CV in order to get that position, right? And then work backwards to actually get those requisite skills as you move forward. And so for postdocs, in many cases, when I'm looking to hire a postdoc, there's some things that are translatable. You know, can you do science, right? Can you write a manuscript? Can you come up with research questions? Are you able to you know, work somewhat independently? It's really not domain specific or follows a specific topic. But oftentimes with postdocs, I'm also looking for some deep skill, right? That either complements our group, you know, something that we don't currently have within our group, or something that we want to build a deeper skill set. And we may be doing this, but we really like what this person is doing in this domain. We want to bring that in and you know, help bring some of maybe the more junior students along. And so I think in many cases, not always, but in many cases, if it's a funded position, the PI will often want, you know, the skill set that you've already demonstrated that you have to bring that to the group as added value. Now, in an ideal situation, you would bring that, and then you would also, in return, gain some new skill set through some new project experience or working with other people in the PI's group, or perhaps through collaborations with a broader team. But again, going back to my initial advice, which is always start with your end goal in mind. So I think it's all, and I do this with my students probably twice a year. You know, we have meetings and we discuss, what are your career goals? What do you want to do with the rest of your life, or at least the next 5 or 10 years? You know, where do you see yourself? And then from that, we then try to develop a plan to help them get to that location, right? And so think about that. Sometimes I know there's a tendency for some folks to kind of just, you know, stumble down the path, right? Like, this is, well, I've always done school, so I'm going to continue to go. So if you're very intentional about what you want to do, I think often you'll have a better chance of success getting the job, whether it's a postdoc or other position moving forward.
Great, thanks. This actually translates well into another question that asked from our participants. So what is the difference in responsibility and time commitment between a postdoc and a PhD student's position? So maybe Marta, you can take this one.
Responsibility and time commitment. In time commitment is similar, I would say. Obviously, there's a difference, you know, when you're starting out and you're creating your sort of project, you're thinking about the research question versus when you are writing a manuscript or you're faced with deadlines of some kind. But I think I would say, from my experience, very similar. As a postdoc, I'm also just a little bit of a better scientist than as a first year PhD student, so I can like manage my life a little better. And with respect to responsibility, you are probably expected to just be more autonomous in the research you do. As you know, Landon was saying, from a postdoc, we expect someone that can do science and can write a manuscript, etc. So you might be on your own a little more, but this really depends on the style of advising of your advisors too. So I wouldn't say this is like a universal experience necessarily. And sometimes as a postdoc, you get to do fun stuff like working with other students. And so you have the responsibility of being some figure that's in between the advisor and the new PhD student. And so you try to fill that gap, and you have a little more responsibility because you're also a little bit of a mentor. So this would be my experience with it. I don't know if someone has anything else to add.
Yeah, I'll chime in here to say that as a postdoc, I would say I probably got into a more sustainable work-life balance that I could continue for the longer term than as a PhD student, meaning I worked less than a PhD student. And it's, in a PhD student role, you have in the beginning a lot of competing things going on. You're taking courses, you have to do homework, you're doing research. You, as a postdoc, you're doing research and you're not often teaching, although that may be part of it. And then another question's asking about applying to other jobs. That's also part of a postdoc because it's a temporary position. But in terms of the responsibilities, I think the time commitment of those is for me, it was more manageable. It was kind of, I could make it in. This is something I can continue doing long term. The responsibility, I hinted at this in the beginning. I was doing a postdoc with an advisor who was trained as a wetland ecologist, and I was doing a project on groundwater and urban development. So my postdoc advisor really gave me very little guidance or input into my topic. And so the PhD time is really your training to become an independent researcher. And that's now it's, the postdoc time is now, for me, I was like, really? No comments on this paper? It's all me. No one's even going to look at this, And so that's not everyone's experience. Some postdocs advisors are much more hands-on, but yeah, that's your time for training when you're a PhD student to become, you might need to be really independent after that. And you're still not maybe supervising other people as a postdoc, as a direct supervisor, but just being responsible for yourself.
Great. Sorry, Landon.
I was just going to echo that from my perspective is hiring postdocs. With a PhD student, I mean, ideally, when you do your PhD, you're also getting experience on how to be a PI, but in many cases, it's often you're trying to get at your dissertation, right? How to basically just do science. My postdocs, the expectation is that they get training in that next step of how to become a PI and run their own lab and develop their own research questions and write grants and those things that not every PhD gets experience in. So that's one of the key differences in my group, at least, between a PhD and a postdoc.
Great, that's a great comment. So I will jump into another question. What is the base timing to approach your search for a postdoc position, as I have in my last stage of PhD work? So anyone have any thoughts? You can just speak up. Like, what is the base timing to start applying for postdoc? So, Minak, would you like to take this one?
All right, I wasn't sure you called in my name. All right, so best time to apply for a postdoc. I think almost everyone starts looking for a postdoc in the final 3 to 6 months of their PhD, right? So I guess that would be the right time, especially unless it's a named fellowship that then you'd be dictating. Then your timeline is dependent on what the fellowship wants. But other than that, most people are looking for positions in the final 6 months of their PhD. But I think, I mean, maybe I look at it a little bit differently in that if you're looking for a postdoc positions, then probably by the first or second year of your PhD, you know already that you want to stay in academia, right? If you are, unless you're one of the minority of people who are undecided till the final end of their PhD, you probably have already made up your mind. So, and I guess the time to make the academic connections really starts from like whenever your coursework is over and you're really big into your research by the time full time, then I would say you should not look for a position, but you should have it on your mind that you are meeting people, and eventually these are the kind of people who may have positions open that, or you may be interested in working with them. So I guess the searching part is kind of eternal towards your, throughout your PhD, because oftentimes the connections you make during your PhD are going to help you land a position. At least that's what happened to me. So I would say, yes, I did search for a position in the final 3 months, but that's would not be true to say that was the exact timeline for actually getting the position. So yeah.
Anyone would like to add on that? Okay, we have another follow-up questions also come from our participants. When we apply for a postdoc position in lab, is it right to approach to the PI and talk about their own research before submitting the application? So I would direct this to Landon.
So the question is, should they communicate with the PI ahead of time to understand the research before applying?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate. However, I would add to that, don't just ask them for information that's found on their website or by reading their articles. If a student contacted me, a prospective postdoc, and asked very basic questions that they could easily have found by reading, even just one of my papers or by looking at my website, I would think they probably didn't put they probably weren't that serious about the position because they haven't even taken the minimal effort to investigate what I do. So I think if there's more specific questions that aren't easily found, through, again, the research website or through maybe some of the more high level articles, then I think that's certainly appropriate if they have a question like that.
Thanks. Marta, what is about your experience on this?
Well, yeah, I was lucky enough that I was able to find a position through my network. So I was already well aware of the type of research that my advisor was doing. But in general, yes, I mean, I don't have a ton to add to what Landon already said. If you have more specific questions, I think it's appropriate to reach out. And in general, if you have questions about what's a good way of applying, I think like for postdoc positions, sometimes the ads can be a little vague, or maybe intentionally, because the PI isn't looking for anything like hyper specific, and so they want to be more open or more broad with their ads. But in this case, I think it's worth talking to the PI, but otherwise, obviously you can just apply and then see where it goes from there. I don't think it's necessary to reach out to anyone beforehand to run the position.
Cool.
And
So
I'll
just to
just,
go, okay, sorry.
Maybe add one more thing related to this and the timing part. So obviously we've been in a very disrupted experience recently with COVID. For all the PhD students out there, you might not have been able to attend many conferences kind of recently, but that's actually, if you are able to attend a conference, that's actually a really natural time to, you know, if you're able to have a conversation with somebody and you're really interested in their work, they might not have an ad open, but you can put it on their radar. Just say, you know, this is what I've been working on. I'm interested in doing a postdoc with you. If you have any positions opening up, let me know. And you can tell them more about your research if they're ask you. But you know, that's a way to even find out about things before they're formally posted, or just express interest, because one of the challenges from hiring a postdoc point of view is finding the right fit. And so if somebody is, you know, at the right timing with the right skills and interests, and so if you can kind of approach someone, and you know, it's harder to do it over email because that is, you know, more asynchronous, and but yeah, if you have an opportunity at a conference, that would be a great time.
Great, thank you. So I think now is the time to transit to ask a postdoc question set. So the first question will direct to Manab. So how do you turn a postdoc into a permanent position?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So do you mean in the same department, like same organization? Or do you mean
yeah, or just from your experience, how do you transit yourself from postdoc to your maybe current position, for example?
Right. Yeah, so so in my experience, it's very, very difficult. I would say near impossible to convert a postdoc position into a permanent position in the same place where you are. At least that's what people would say other things that no, there is always a path, but in my experience, that is not really true. But in the sense that I'm talking about university. I'm not talking about places like NCAR and NASA Goddard, who have a very different setup than a university. So there it is definitely possible to convert it into a permanent position. For example, in NCAR, you can continue, generally you would join in a position like a postdoc position, or you would join as an associate scientist too, which is equivalent to a postdoc position. Associate scientist 2 or 1, generally 1 are people without a PhD, but 2 are people with a PhD. So it's equivalent to a postdoc. So you join it and then continue as AS3s and maybe eventually become project scientist and then staff scientist. So it's more of a long-term path at a career that you can pursue at National Center for Atmospheric Research. At NASA Goddard, it's slightly different that technically you are not really employed by them, and especially if you're not a US citizen, they cannot employ you anyway. So you are a contractor working for one of the, for example, generally they would hire the postdocs through Earth System Science Interdisciplinary Center, ESIC, through the University of Maryland, or they have a couple of other agencies, private companies through which they hire, but you would work inside Goddard, but technically you would be employed by these companies. So you can continue, even there, it's the same deal as NCAR, where you can continue to become like research associates, 1, 2, 3, and then assistant research scientist. But eventually to get a permanent position, you actually have to be the number of permanent positions are quite low, federal employees basically. So these are quite low. So from my understanding, when I was there, I think 1 in 5 or something, maybe in the lab would be federal employees. Rest of them would be contractors. So, but in terms of transitioning to a proper tenure track position rather than in a scientist position, if that's what I'm guessing many people are interested in. So that I think is a different conversation altogether, because there the path is kind of not really laid out clearly, because the organization is not offering you a clear path from your postdoc and you continue on. So a lot of it is, I would say the element of luck. I can say many things, but I would say the element of luck is enormous, you know, and I can say that it's not really a total meritocracy, regardless of what anyone says. It's not. But at the same time, I would not say that it's purely chance. You know, it's not a ball of dice, rolling dice. So you can definitely do many things in terms of. Oftentimes, for permanent positions, at least in the US now, the belief is that if you are interested in working in one of the big cities, then the doors are pretty much like shut, because it's very difficult to get a position in. I've had this conversation with many friends, because they want to stay in New York, they want to stay in California, or they want to stay in one of the big cities, but the positions are not coming up. So most of the time, the positions that are coming up are in I won't say undesirable, but they do not want to be there, or they are quite far off from big cities. But if you're willing to make that compromise, then I would say there are a lot of positions still open, because many of my friends are still in the tenure track process application, or they have got positions recently. So I know that there are positions available. But in terms of India, I won't really say much, because I don't think there are many applicants to India here, but I'm very happy to share. Our process is kind of a little bit different, because we have a open position all the time, but the hiring is on a 6-month cycle. And obviously we are very interested in having foreign applicants who are not Indian citizens. In fact, that is highly encouraged, in fact, that you apply. Whether you find it interesting enough to come here, that is your decision, but the Institute is very welcoming of foreign professors. We do have people here from UK, from Ireland, and I know there are people from US as well, a couple of them. So yes, but I'll be happy to speak about it at another time. Thank you.
Does anyone have other perspective want to add on? Okay, so we have another question come from our participant. How many papers or how many years as a postdoc should I have before applying to the faculty position? So maybe Landon or Aditi would like to take this one.
Yeah, so I've sat on 4 search committees since I've been a faculty member, 3 for research assistant professor, tenure track, and then 1 for a teaching professor. Certainly the quantity and quality of papers is a factor that, and probably the main factor that comes into the discussion, as well as fit. Do they actually fit the ad and the skill set that we're desiring? But there's never been a certain number or threshold that needs to be reached in order to apply to these positions. Obviously, the more competitive positions at kind of the top 10 or 20 institutions is going to maybe have a higher threshold than perhaps a lower one. I can say for myself, when I actually applied pretty early. After 2.5 years in my PhD, I applied for a couple of positions just to kind of see if I could get something. And was fortunate enough to get a job at Kansas State University with only 2 publications, right? And I had maybe 2 others that were in the works. But then there's other extremes where there's people have 20. So it's really just position by position and the fit. In that particular case, I fit the ad really well. And had the publications I did have were in high impact journals, so that certainly helped. So I don't think there's I think what you're probably asking, and I would have had the same question too, is there some magic number that I need to reach in order to be qualified for a faculty position? The answer to that is no, there's not. And so I think what you could focus on is just really high quality work, right? And when I'm looking at a job or someone that's applied to position, I would rather see 3 or 4 articles and really make an impact in good journals, as opposed to 50, and that person is the lead author, made major contributions to that work, as to 20 papers, but you're the 8th author, and they're in lower impact journals, or maybe don't speak on the impact of the journal itself, but just on the actual work itself, it's kind of just a trivial contribution. So that would be my advice, is just sometimes people maybe try to split work into, it could be really just one really good paper, but instead they split it into 2 or 3 kind of mediocre papers. I think it would be better off, or my approach at least, is to try to go to one impactful paper. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, all good insights. And I'll also say about this question that maybe unfortunately, you may not have your postdoc papers even come out by the time you finish the postdoc. So that's the challenge. It's really, so I started my postdoc in 2014 and ended it in 2016. And the first paper from the postdoc came out in 2016, the same year I started the faculty position. So it's really, there's a delay and process. And so, while you're postdoc, it's really your PhD papers from your dissertation and anything that followed from that are going to be coming out during your postdoc, that are going to be making up really the bulk of, unless you're doing a really long or multiple postdocs, that's going to be making up the bulk of your application for a faculty position. And so that's important, basically, to publish from your dissertation. That's critical.
Yeah, and as far as the search committee goes, we, at least in the ones that I've served on, we'll read the letters closely. So as a first pass, you'll look through the CV just to see if it actually, these people are working on the area that we're advertising for, because we'll be advertising for a water resources position, and there will be people doing asphalt, right, or something, like trying to get in there. So we try to eliminate some of those, but once you kind of get to the next level, then we'll read the letters very thoroughly. And so that's where you could highlight your postdoc experience and the research that hasn't come out yet and been published. But you could still say, hey, this is how this work that I'm doing in my postdoc position helps fulfill the what you guys are looking for in this posted ad.
Thank you. This is a great advice. So I have next question directed to Marta. So what is your current strategy in this transition from postdoc to the permanent career?
Well, my current strategy is trying to do good with science, which is such a basic answer, but I think it's important, and it kind of ties into the answers that Aditi and Anna just gave. You want to do impactful science, and you want to carve your path, and you want to try to have a trajectory that is yours in terms of the science that you're doing, to kind of carve your niche, so that you are prepared for a position, especially when we're talking about a professor position, assistant professor position, so that you can sell yourself as a unique scientist, and which is probably what most of the ads are looking for, and along with that, you want to try to get as much training as possible into the things that you don't get a training on during your PhD. So writing proposals, and trying to find ways to get your research idea funded. And so sell your ideas, and writing a good grant proposal are some of these. Coming up with the unique research questions or others. And so, and also anything that's related to mentoring. So I think it's a good idea to ask your advisor to be a mentor of another PhD student or a master's student, so that you can collaborate and kind of be in the room when your advisor is advising, because learning how to advise is also a really important skill, and one that you would not get as a PhD student necessarily. So I guess my current strategy is doing impactful research, and also learning all the things that you do as a professor that are kind of unique to the job, and you don't necessarily learn as a PhD student.
Cool. Thank you very much. Now is the time to move to next part, the postdoc section. So the first question is how to manage the collaboration work with PI and or the PhD supervisor. Or after we leaving our current postdoc position, how do we manage that collaboration with our previous postdoctoral PI? So I will direct this to Aditi.
Yeah, so this is something that is a conversation to maybe have with somebody or do, this is talking about both PhD supervisors and after you finish the postdoc. So a conversation to have about, like I was just talking about papers coming out from your PhD while you're in your postdoc, because you are likely going to need time to respond to reviewers. For example, you just 4 months later, you get and you're in a postdoc, and then you get some comments back. And so you need to have some time to be able to address that, not focus on that exclusively, but to be able to, have your postdoc supervisor support your overall, it's part of your overall career development. Like you have some papers from before and you want to get them out, not necessarily starting a whole bunch of new things that are other than what you're supported on, but really, finishing up things. So that's something to discuss with them. And yeah, and maybe I'll let other people respond.
So I would say talk to your PI, right? I'm a big fan of being very direct and explicit and having these conversations, as opposed to just maybe trying to like, I won't discuss that with the PI. Instead, I'm going to just kind of do this on the side. And it might be, everybody's got different expectations, right? And then maybe there's a critical deadline for your postdoc work that needs to be met, right? And if that isn't communicated clearly, then there's a misalignment of expectations, right? And that always usually causes problems. So my overall advice would be talk to the PI directly. I think another piece of advice might be with respect to, PhD to postdoc. And I can talk about the next piece here in a second. PhD to postdoc and working on that PhD work. I think in my experience, I think it's helpful to maybe set clear boundaries. And so if your PI does have expectations, you can say, well, I work, either in this location or maybe these hours, 8 to 5 on my postdoc work. And then outside of that, from these hours, I'm working on this other work. When you start blending the two together, it gets messy, right? And it's hard to like clearly lay out where you're spending your time. And so that would be the piece of advice from PhD to postdoc. From postdoc to a faculty position, you have a lot more control over your time and how you spend it. And so if you want to dedicate that time to getting out papers from your postdoc, I think that's certainly a good idea, obviously, to get those publications out. I don't know if this was specifically what you're asking or not. One other piece of advice that I would say that's hand on to me, and I'll pass it on here, is to think about is to clearly get those expectations laid out from your position, your tenure track position, on what how they evaluate any work that you did with your PhD advisor or with your postdoc advisor. Some universities, for instance, when I was at Kansas State University, they didn't really care. Publication's a publication, a grant's a grant. Like if you did it with your postdoc advisor or your PhD advisor, it's fine. Now, I say that if you did everything with your PhD advisor or postdoc advisor, that would raise red flags. Here at Virginia Tech, it's maybe they want that a little more clearly delineated. They want clearly to show your path a bit more. But it's still okay to maybe have a couple publications with your postdoc advisor or your PhD advisor, just as long as it's not dominating your research portfolio. So I would, again, a big fan of just being very direct and kind of explicit in those expectations, not only between me and the postdoc or PhD, but also between me and my supervisors as well, to understand what those expectations are, so then I can follow suit.
Great. Does anyone want to add on that?
Maybe I can. So one thing is, demarcating your position, assuming that you have a tenure track position, and then obviously you still have a relationship with your postdoc advisor as well as your PhD advisor. One thing it came to my mind is whether, because we already have so much data that we had collected, we can continue to publish for many years actually, and even like based on that, and I would continue to get papers out of it. It's kind of an easy path to pursue, but I made it a point to not do it. We kind of put a full stop to it. I did not do any new work after I joined my tenure track, like my position in IIT here. And of course, I kind of work in the same area and I still work with them, but I instead concentrated on writing a new proposal and getting it funded. And once I got it funded, I continued to work with them, but now it kind of comes from my side and my funding and my ideas, more of it. So you can say that it's kind of the same thing that I probably could have done without the funding, because we had some previous work done in that area. But I think it's much easier that way to develop a kind of an independence. It always happens that if you have collected a lot of data in your PhD, then you have the urge that you want to get every inch out of it in terms of papers. But I would say if you have already got the tenure track position, it's totally fine to relax on old work for 6 months to 1 year. And I think most universities are totally fine with it. And I think you would come out ahead if you just pursue new ideas in your PhD after you join your position. And then you can always go back, because now we are restarting many of the things that we had done 3-4 years back, 4 5 years back. We are now publishing it, but my students are working on those ideas. And it kind of helps to own the work rather than people seeing it as just as a continuing to work with their previous advisor, which, as was previously mentioned, some universities don't really look at it as kindly. Yeah, so I guess it also depends on where you're working. Yes.
Marta, do you have any experience that you collaborate with your previous PI?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually,
I can speak.
Oh, sorry. We have a very similar name, so I thought he called my name out. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I can speak to the first part, to PhD advisor or some more left from your PhD into your postdoc. And my postdoc advisors were both very transparent. We have a lab manual. There's all the rules in there, all the expectations in there. And it's very transparent that actually 30% of my time, which I think is a lot, 30% of my time I can dedicate to some other stuff that it's not research in the lab. And that includes both past work that you have open in terms of past publications that you want to finalize, and also applying for new jobs, which is also very time consuming, and it's not related to the current research. So depending on what stage you are in your postdoc, if it's the first 6 months, you're probably working on past publication. If it's a little further ahead, you're probably trying to apply to positions, and that is also time consuming, and that is also time that you need in order to succeed. And so I mean, I echo what a lot of people said before me. Setting the expectations is really important, and it's understood that postdocs have other stuff that they're working on that is not strictly the research in the lab.
Okay, great. So we have a few more minutes for one last questions. We have a question from our participants. Can you brief about your international collaboration, if you have any of these? So maybe Aditi?
International collaborations. Is that we
Yes.
were asking about? Okay, so yeah, I've had some international collaborations, and that was just originating from kind of a workshop, bringing together people who are interested in a certain topic. And so we had a shared topic that we're interested in and worked on synthesis paper, for example. I haven't had funded international collaborations, so that's a little bit more challenging. Someone else can talk about that if they like.
Anyone would like to hit on that?
So I can go, or Landon can. So I work with my previous colleagues, so that kind of by default becomes international, but in a way that, because I used to work in US for 9 years, all my collaborators are actually in US. But yeah, there are actually a lot of opportunities for cross-border collaboration, especially if it's India and US. And I know that there are a lot of programs between Europe and US, and you can pursue them. If anybody wants to know any specific opportunities, then you can go to USIEF, which is more of an agency set up only for US-India collaborations. And actually a lot of faculty and students collaborate through USEIF in terms of both projects as well as named fellowships. And then there are similar things that you can work on through Fulbright. And in fact, I know at least 2 of my colleagues who have gone through Fulbright to continue to work on research projects. So those are things that you can pursue. And of course, there is always, I would say, there is a lack of funding, and there is also an abundance of funding at the same time. In that, once you are in the, in the right network of things, if you're interested in pursuing things to, say, if you're working in disaster risk reduction, then you are working at the UNDRR and so on and so forth. So if you are working with Center for Disaster, CDRI, which is a UN agency as well, or institute. So once you're working with them, you'll kind of get introduced to other people and other opportunities. So I think, yeah, that kind of comes with the job, that one thing leads to other, and international collaborations are kind of the norm now, because obviously hydrology is global, and especially, yeah, you get a lot of support for that.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comment. And yeah, now it's about the time. So thank you all for joining this panel discussion and sharing your wonderful experience and invaluable advices. But just before the end of this event, I want to also give the credit to our wonderful team that organizing these panel discussions. And a little bit of advertisements for the next event. The next panel of the discussion is about the non-academic job in hydrology, which will be hosted on the September 8th, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And here's a register link. And please share link with your friends and within your network. And another events that we have this year is the webinar workshop about the grant writing, which will help you to apply for the postdoctoral fellowship. So please follow us, and we will post the register link shortly. And one last thing, if you are interested in becoming a part of the H3S, the application will open in the late fall. So please follow us from either from the Twitter account or our website. We will post the corresponding information when the opening, when the application is opened. So this is the end of the event, and thank you for joining this event. I hope to see you again in the next panel discussion that we have in September.